When it comes to finding a sponsor, where to start? So there's two ways, I guess. First of all, you might start by designing the garden and then trying to find a sponsor. But also there is an argument for finding sponsors first and then creating the design, which is potentially a little bit contentious because designers should be true to themselves, but finding sponsorship is really difficult. And so we may need to be a bit more commercial about it and come up with a good idea, something that you think sponsors will be interested in, and then come up with the design. So you might ask, well, what does a good idea look like? Well, that's something that commercially sponsors might be interested in. It's something that has a good story that people will want to be associated with. And it's something that's newsworthy, something that people will want to find out about. When I wanted to do a show garden at RHS Malvern, I knew I had to come up with this so-called good idea. My youngest stepdaughter has type 1 diabetes, and the previous year she'd been extremely ill with complications due to her diabetes, and at the time she'd been working for the local landscaping and building merchants. And they had been extraordinarily supportive because it was a very difficult time. And I also knew that diabetes was always in the news because more and more people are being diagnosed with it. So I thought that maybe Diabetes UK might be interested in showing a show garden to help get their messaging out there, and that Tippers might be interested in sponsoring it because they are a landscape supplier. It would help to advertise their services and their products, but also it's an opportunity to talk about what a great and caring employer they were. And all the time, however, I had absolutely no idea what this garden design was going to look like. I just thought I needed to get these guys on board first. So obviously you have to work out how you're going to initially get in touch with these sponsors. And I happened to be talking to a really good friend of mine about my idea. And there and then, he suddenly picked up the phone. He said, I know the owner of Tippers, and he just made a phone call. And right there and then in his kitchen, he arranged for our first meeting, which was brilliant. I would always say when approaching potential sponsors, if you can do so in person, it's absolutely the best way to do it. And it might not be that you know them personally. It might be that you know somebody who knows somebody, or even who knows somebody who knows somebody. But if you can find some kind of personal approach, it is much easier, it's much more direct, and you are much more likely to be successful. Of course, once you've got that meeting, it's up to you to sell your idea. But that first approach, if it can be personal, it's much, much better. And that's a really good example of just how important it is to put it out there that you want to do this. You need to tell everybody and anybody who will listen, and even those who don't want to listen, that you want to do this. And it's just, you just never know who might know somebody who can help you out. So just put it out there. When it came to the first meeting with Tippers, I thought it was really important to go in quite softly. So I suggested a scoping meeting. So a meeting just to give me an opportunity to explain my idea and find out how they might possibly be interested. No mention of sponsorship, no mention of money, nothing like that, just a conversation. However, when you're having that conversation, even when you're going in softly, it's really important to make sure that at every opportunity you're explaining to this potential sponsor just why they might be interested and what's in it for them. So when it came to Tippers, I thought what might be in it for them was that it would raise their profile as a landscaping supplier. It would help to establish their expertise and products as high quality because they were associated with an RHS show garden. I also sold it as an opportunity for them to incorporate any products or services that they might want to highlight, and we could include that in the design process. I also wanted to explain that the whole project created brilliant marketing content to get all these messages across. And I also shared with them the attendance and the reach and the marketing reach and the audience demographic of the show, and what a brilliant audience that is to speak to. So to summarise, I would say I went in softly, but I made sure that everything I said was from their point of view and why they would be interested in doing it. So it's worth remembering when you're talking or looking for potential sponsors that nowadays you're unlikely to find one overall sponsor. The likelihood is that you're going to have a group of people, companies, organisations that come together and individually sponsor different sections of the garden. And it's also important to remember that sponsorship comes in many different forms. The most obvious one is the financial funding. So that's the dream lump sum. But financial funding can also come from small donations, individuals, crowdfunding, that kind of thing. Most sponsorship comes in the form of donations. And when I say donations, I mean of products, donations of services. So when it comes to products, can you find somebody to donate paving, building materials, water features, garden furniture, that kind of thing? And when it comes to services, can you find somebody who would donate landscaping services, donate logistical services or tool hire, things like that? Then there's loaning things. So this is where you borrow products that you include in the show garden. So that might be things like sculptures or garden buildings. You can rent things. Nowadays you can rent trees, large specimen plants. This is all types of sponsorship. But things that you don't necessarily think about or are that obvious in terms of sponsorship forms, one of them is, for instance, intellectual property. So when I was working with Diabetes UK, I was associated with their branding. I had access to their marketing department. I was associated with them as a professional body, and it almost gives you a seal of approval. So that's really, really valuable in itself. And then there's managing cash flow. Very often when you're doing any kind of project, you have to spend money before you get money. And if you can find somebody that will cover that gap financially for you, they're not actually at the end of the day giving you any money. But if they can help you manage your cash flow, that's really valuable as a form of sponsorship. So what did the Tippers sponsorship package actually end up looking like? Well, it ended up being absolutely brilliant. It wasn't a lump sum of money at all. However, what they did supply was all our building materials. So that was hardcore, sand, cement, adhesives, grouting, kind of you name it in terms of building materials, which saved us a huge amount of money. But also we were able to avail ourselves of all their tool hire. So if we needed diggers, if we needed forklifts or anything like that, that was all free of charge. And then they have a deliveries department. So we had all our logistics covered, anything that needed to be moved, delivered, etc. So, and that costs a huge amount of money. So that again saved us a lot of money. They did support us in terms of cash flow, and they actually set up a credit account in their business for us, which was tremendously helpful. And they also hosted and facilitated all our project meetings. But above and beyond all that was the amazing contacts that they were able to offer us from their network as well. So they put us in contact with a landscaper, and it was a landscaper they knew who wanted to get into RHS show gardens. And blow me, we got all our landscaping for free, which was incredible. They also had started to stock a new paving supplier, and they wanted to highlight the paving. So we started to work with a company called Ethan Mason Paving, and they wanted to highlight their porcelain. So suddenly we had beautiful porcelain that we could work with. Not only that, but one of the services that Tippers had just started was to do bespoke porcelain paving cutting. And so we were able to avail ourselves of CNC machine cutting of porcelain, which was fabulous because that meant that we could do just about anything in the design and it would look great. So the approach to Diabetes UK was completely different. For a start, it was a cold approach. So I literally just rang the number for Diabetes UK and asked to speak to somebody about the idea. I was really lucky. They put me in touch with the regional marketing manager, and then she put me in touch with their Midlands regional head. I outlined the idea that I had in a phone call. I think it's really important to make sure you have your so-called elevator speech ready then, so you are short, sharp, succinct, to the point in terms of what your idea is. I then had to sum that up in a brief email, and with that requested an opportunity to meet, which I was lucky enough to get. The main hurdle with the first meeting was actually explaining to Diabetes why on earth they would want to do a show garden. And I think that is probably the biggest hurdle that you have with all potential sponsors, getting them to understand why a show garden would help them and why they would want to be interested, especially if they've got nothing to do with gardening or the outdoors or anything like that. So the first thing I did was share with them the audience, the potential audience numbers. So that's the PR and marketing reach that you get from RHS Malvern, and it's absolutely huge. It's around about 23 million in all. I also described and explained the audience demographic and how perfect that was for their marketing strategy. So basically a huge audience made up of the perfect people that they want to speak to. I also shared examples of show gardens that have been done in the past for charities and how the design of those gardens had helped to convey a message. And I explained that because the garden hadn't been designed yet, that we could work really closely with them to pinpoint the message that they wanted to get across and make sure that that was done so via the design of the garden. And I also explained that all this project gave some really engaging and unusual content for PR and marketing to be able to use to help convey the messaging that they wanted to get across. Diabetes UK did agree to come on board, and they did so not from a financial sponsorship point of view, but they gave their official backing to the project, and we were able to avail ourselves of their intellectual property, so things like their logo, their branding, their marketing materials, but also their time and resource. So we were able to work with their branding, communications and contents team. And it was only once I'd got tippers on board and the porcelain and the landscaper and Diabetes UK that I then started to actually design the garden. So the way I started the design process with Diabetes UK was to find out from them what their overall message was that they wanted to convey. And they wanted to talk about emotional well-being and the journey from diagnosis through to managing the condition well. They wanted to talk about the importance of managing blood sugar levels, and they wanted to talk about the seriousness and the scale of the condition, which are all quite abstract concepts when it comes to garden design. But the way I did that was that I started with their, one of the ways I started was with their brand graphic, which is a circle intersected by an arc. And the circle became a patio and the arc became a path. When we were talking about the journey from diagnosis through to managing the condition well, that tends to be, when managing any health condition, more difficult to start with. And then as you become more educated and more used to managing the condition, it becomes easier. So that arced path was narrow and dark and stepped on one side, and then as you walked through the garden it became wider and it was a ramp and it was lighter as well. So that's how the garden design incorporated the idea of managing the journey. So when it came to incorporating the importance of managing blood sugar levels, That came in the form of 2 sculptural metal graphs either side of the patio. And these graphs were actually taken directly from my stepdaughter's blood glucose monitor and literally showed the highs and lows of blood glucose when you're managing diabetes. Fundamentally, you need to immerse yourself in their messaging. You need to really understand the messaging that they want to get across. What's their marketing strategy? What do they want people to take away from this garden? And then the trick is really to try and use as many design references, whether they're literal or whether they're metaphoric, so that the whole design of the garden is literally littered with design references. That then means that it becomes impossible to talk to anybody about that garden without referring to the message that they want to convey. Obviously, there was the rest of the garden that needed funding. There was more to cover than just what Tippers and Diabetes UK could. So, for instance, when it came to hedges, we borrowed those. We had to cover the cost of delivery and return and any damages, but that obviously really helped. We rented specimen shrubs and trees. And we borrowed garden furniture. We borrowed the chair that was in the garden. But fundamentally, there comes a point when you do need cold, hard cash. This is where we really tapped into the network that we'd created by doing this project. And once again, we just put it out there that we did need to raise some cash, mainly to cover the cost of planting. And we were really lucky in that one of our sponsors actually found an anonymous cash donor. So that was absolutely brilliant. That process took 5 months to go through and to get that through. And I could go into all the details, but it ended up being incredibly convoluted, and it ended up involving other organisations to make it happen as well. But what I would say is that you just have to be really tenacious. You mustn't give up. Sometimes you have to be way more flexible and adaptable than you ever thought possible, and really jump through hoops and find the way to make it happen. And when people bring problems to you and they say, look, we really want to support you, but we can't because of X, Y, or Z, go and find a way round X, Y, and Z for them. And that will take time, it will take research, it will take squillions of emails and phone calls, and it took 5 months. But I managed it in the end, and it was absolutely worth it, and it made the garden happen. When I first approached Diabetes UK, it was months before they got back to me first time. Turns out they were all on holiday. When I was approaching the metal fabricator that worked with us, again, it was months before he got back to us, and again, he was just very busy. And then when it came to our major cash sponsor, they didn't get back to us until she was clearing her inbox on Christmas Eve. So you must follow up and you must keep going. And all this takes a long time. The actual designing of the garden turns out to be just a teeny tiny bit of the whole process. I would say be prepared that this whole project will take a good 12 months to make happen. You will literally spend days, weeks, months of your life researching, networking, calling, meeting. And remember that everything takes a lot longer when people are doing stuff for free or they're donating it. It's not necessarily their priority, and they might have to do it in downtime or in between other stuff. And things do take time when you're working with companies and organisations. They might have to have board meetings for things to be okayed, and processes that they have to go through to okay things, and all that takes time. But having said that, whilst it is an enormous challenge, it's also incredibly rewarding. And the Diabetes UK garden turned out to be a fabulous success. We ended up with a superbly successful social media campaign. We were featured on radio before, during and after the show garden. The BBC did a programme about the preparation and the building of the garden. We were on TV, we were on ITV News and Weather during the show. We got a tremendous amount of coverage, and Diabetes UK were absolutely thrilled about the messaging that we managed to get out there. And during the show itself, just by the number of leaflets that we handed out, we estimated we spoke to about 10,000 people, and every single one of those we talked to about diabetes. And we even had people making a special journey to come to the garden to talk to Diabetes UK about their personal experiences of diabetes. And it was on a personal front, it was the most rewarding 4 days to talk to all those people about their journeys and their diagnoses, and how the fabulous work of Diabetes UK had really helped them. And so all those people that helped to sponsor the project in all their varying forms, it was just the most amazing result. And I would absolutely say, go for it. Just be aware, it's a lot of hard work.